He dragged the dog by a thick chain, boots grinding deep ruts in the hard earth, and the air was so thin you could almost hear the dog's heart pounding. Weak, trembling, unable to resist, just a ghost of the wild thing he'd once been. And just as the man lifted that stick, ready to strike, Blaze, the Mustang with fire in his eyes, reared up behind him, hooves slicing the sunlight, refusing to run, refusing to let cruelty win, standing his ground to protect what mattered. That was the day everything shifted in the high desert, out where the mesas glow red at dusk and the wind carries stories older than memory. I'm telling you, that place, it's quiet, but sometimes the silence feels wrong, almost heavy, like it's holding its breath. For days before, Blaze had been restless. He wouldn't trot to the fence in the mornings anymore. He just stood there, ears pointed at the horizon, watching that lonely ridge where Rusty used to wait. Folks said the old dog must have wandered back to the wild. Dogs do that sometimes, you know? But Blaze, he knew better. He could feel it in his bones. 3 nights before that showdown, a battered old pickup rumbled through the edge of the sanctuary's land. Behind the wheel was Grant Mullery, a man folks whispered about, the kind who treated animals like problems to be solved with chains, starvation, and brute force. And under the filthy tarp in his truck bed, there was Rusty. Muzzled, legs tied so tight you'd wince, but those eyes, man, those eyes still had fight in them. Grant, he wanted to break Rusty, you see. Never had a dog with scars and spirit, one who wouldn't just roll over. So he locked him in a sun-baked shed behind his ugly little cabin and waited for Rusty to surrender. But Rusty never broke. You know what I mean? Some souls, they just refuse. Meanwhile, Blaze back at the rescue center was falling apart in a way only animals can. Quiet, constant. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't rest. He just paced and stared and called out into the night, a sound sharp enough to pierce your heart. When darkness came, he slammed his body against the old wooden gate over and over until, finally, it splintered with a crack that rang through the night. No one saw him leave. He slipped out into the desert, not just following a scent, but something deeper, instinct, loyalty, maybe even love. It's wild what animals carry inside. Things we'll never quite understand. By the time the sun rose, Natalie Cruz, who ran the sanctuary, found the broken fence. She stood out there, wind in her hair, scanning those endless plains. He's not gone wild, she whispered, almost like she was talking to herself. He's searching. The day burned on, the sun climbing higher, baking the land to dust. Out by that shed, Rusty barely clung to life, breathing shallow, flies everywhere, eyes closed, but not dead yet. And then, hoofbeats steady, determined, slicing through the mirage. Blaze appeared, sun glinting off his back, looking almost unreal, like something pulled out of a dream or a legend. He let out this piercing whinny, the kind that sends chills up your arms, and somehow Rusty heard him. Blaze didn't wait. He charged that shed door, kicked it clean off its hinges, and pressed up against Rusty's side, nosing at the heavy chain. Pulled, and Rusty, bless his soul, tried to crawl, just a little. Suddenly, Grant was there, stormed out of his cabin, red with rage, cussing up a storm. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he screamed, yanking the other end of the chain so hard Rusty's paws scraped raw against the dirt. Grant had that stick in his hand, raised up, muscles tight, and for a heartbeat, it looked like something truly ugly was about to happen. That's when Blaze reared up, all power and wildness, hooves lashing out, dust flying everywhere. He put himself right between that man and the dog. I swear, for a second, time stopped. Even Grant couldn't move. You could hear nothing but the wind and the pounding of your own heart. And then, out of nowhere, the roar of another engine. A truck screeched to a halt. Natalie and Jake jumped out, Natalie already filming with her phone, eyes blazing. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Grant lowered his stick. He saw the phone, the witnesses. The game was up. Police arrived not long after. Grant, the big tough dog breaker, suddenly looked small, shrunk by his own shame. Authorities did what they had to do. Natalie scooped up Rusty, and Jake led Blaze home. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a homecoming. Back at the sanctuary, they rebuilt the fences, stronger this time, and set Rusty and Blaze side by side. No more lonely watching from a distance. The two old friends lay together at the fence, pressed close, sometimes sleeping, sometimes just looking out across the land, breathing together. Visitors started coming, not just for the animals, But for the story, a story about a dog who'd once dragged a dying foal back from the edge, and a Mustang who'd crossed the desert to save his friend in return. See, it's funny how things come full circle. The strongest bonds, the ones that last, aren't the ones made of words or promises, but the ones built in silence, suffering, and the choices we make when nobody's watching. Sometimes the ones you save turn around and save you, not because they owe you, but because they remember how it felt to be shown a little mercy and decide, against all odds, to return it, even if it costs them everything. And that's the thing, right? Out here, under the wide sky, where the wind writes its own stories, justice doesn't always show up in a badge or a courtroom. Sometimes it rides in on four legs, stands tall, and dares the world to do better. So, let me ask you, do you think animals know more about loyalty and justice than most people do? Or is it just that, out here in the wild, they're free enough to show it? Share your thoughts below. Whose side are you on when kindness and courage go up against cruelty? Let's hear your story. You ever notice how, after the dust settles, it's not the ending that sticks with you? It's what happens next. Some stories don't close the way you'd expect. The papers ran that photo for a week. Blaze, standing tall beside Rusty, sunlight streaming through the fence, both of them with that look, the look of survivors who've seen too much, lost too much, but never gave up on each other. Folks who came out to the sanctuary thought the drama was done, but in truth, the hardest part was still ahead. You'd think after a rescue like that, healing would be simple: a warm stall, a fresh bowl of food, a quiet place to rest. But real life's messier, Natalie Cruz, for one, learned it the hard way. She became a kind of local hero overnight, her phone ringing off the hook, reporters showing up with cameras and empty questions, always wanting a headline, never understanding what it took to rebuild a broken trust. Jake took it worse. He'd always been good with the animals, but people, not so much. He stopped talking to anyone who didn't come with mud on their boots or hay in their hair. But the real change happened in Blaze and Rusty themselves. At first, it was like nothing had changed. Blaze limped around, sore from the journey, refusing to let anyone treat his scrapes. Rusty flinched at every sudden noise, barking in his sleep, chain scars still fresh on his legs. You could see them both hanging on by a thread. But about a week later, right as the first storm of the season rolled in, something strange happened. A stray, some skinny, half-wild pup with one ear chewed up and a collar so old you could barely read the tag showed up at the edge of the sanctuary, just standing there in the rain, too scared to cross the fence line. Natalie was out back, umbrella in hand, calling gently, but the pup wouldn't come. Blaze and Rusty, though, they saw him first. Blaze gave this low, rolling nicker, and Rusty, still limping, pressed his nose against the fence, eyes locked on the shivering newcomer. And somehow, as if remembering what it felt like to be lost and alone, Rusty let out a single, soft bark, nothing more. The pup hesitated, then, as if understanding a language older than words, ducked under the lowest rail and ran straight for them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't noisy. But it was real. That night, Natalie found the three of them curled together in the hay, warm and dry, the storm pounding outside. The next morning, the sanctuary was buzzing. News travels fast in small towns. Folks started bringing in food, old blankets, even a couple of kids with handmade carts. But not all visitors came with good intentions. One afternoon, a black SUV rolled up, windows dark as night, and out stepped a man in a crisp suit with a badge on his belt: Animal Control, state level. He wanted to see Rusty's records, wanted answers about Blaze, about the incident in the desert. Rumors were flying that Grant Mallory, yeah, the same guy, was threatening to sue the sanctuary, claiming they'd stolen his property and endangered public safety by letting a wild Mustang roam free. Now, let me back up a sec. Nobody was ready for another fight, especially not Natalie. The community was split. Some folks backed Natalie and the animals, others sided with Grant, claiming you can't just let animals take the law into their own hoofs. The sanctuary was suddenly a battleground. TV crews parked outside, debates flaring up at the diner, even the sheriff making vague statements about order and regulations. Jake, for his part, wasn't having any of it. He cornered the animal control guy behind the barn, laid it out clear: if you take Rusty or Blaze, you'll have to go through me. The man just laughed, but he didn't come back alone. 3 days later, just before dawn, Natalie heard the dogs barking like mad. She ran outside, flashlights in the dark, voices shouting. Someone had cut the lock on the back gate. Jake sprinted to the pasture, saw two men trying to corral Blaze into a waiting trailer. Rusty, still stiff but wild with panic, threw himself against the fence again and again, howling. And then, out of nowhere, the stray pup, the one nobody expected much from, darted in front of the men, barking, biting at their heels, leading them on a wild chase through the mud and brambles. It bought Jake just enough time to let Blaze loose, swinging the gate open with a yell that echoed off the hills. Blaze didn't bolt. He stood his ground again, nostrils flaring, eyes locked on the intruders until they backed down and ran for their truck, tires spinning, headlights swallowed by the dawn. That was the moment the community decided. Word spread like wildfire about the break-in, about how Blaze, Rusty, and that stray stood up, not just for themselves, but for the whole sanctuary. The sheriff, pressured by townsfolk and TV cameras, finally launched an investigation into Grant's old training business. They found more than anyone wanted to believe: dozens of abused dogs, chains, and evidence that shut his place down for good. By the time summer settled in, the sanctuary wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Blaze and Rusty became legends, local kids painting their faces on barn walls, visitors leaving behind little tokens, bandanas, painted rocks, poems written in shaky kid handwriting. The stray pup, named Lucky by a group of school kids, became the new mascot, always trotting at Blaze's side, never letting him out of sight. And Natalie? She finally breathed easy. For once, her phone was quiet, her heart less heavy. But you know how it is, nothing stays peaceful forever. Some folks say letting animals fight their own battles is asking for trouble. Others believe, deep down, that sometimes the only way to beat cruelty is with a bit of wildness, a bit of loyalty you can't explain, only feel. So I'll ask you, what would you have done? Stand with the law, or with the ones who risked everything for each other? Does justice come from a badge, or from the choices we make when no one's watching? Drop your take below, because out here, every story is still being written, and sometimes the real heroes walk on four legs. If you've ever had your own battle between right and wrong, between rules and what feels true, let's hear it. Would you trust the system or stand with the wild?